What's up, nerds, and welcome back to another MARVEL Duel video. So we're going to go through two popular archetypes and just have a look at the cards, and then I'll explain in Duel how they work better. So to start off with, we've got Thor. When you're playing Asgardian character, he gains 1 power. We've got the Guard Army of Asgard. If he dies, he gives a friendly character plus 3 armor, massive in this deck. We've got Jane Foster with an Asgardian character plus 3 power plus 3 armor. Hogun gets 2 power every time armor is lost, so you can imagine with the other cards it gets quite big, especially with the equipped cards plus 5 power plus 5 armor. Throg is probably my least favourite in the deck, but he does come in handy in certain points. It depends on what other cards you've got in the deck. Then you've got Thor's hammer, obviously, plus 6 armor and deals 9 damage, which is really important. Then we've got Thor, and you'll see later on in the duel that we don't actually use him as much as we use Hogun. You've got Asgardian Glory, and then you've got the Stormbreaker, but actually I think we'll take the Stormbreaker out, and instead what we'll do, we'll stick in the Valkyrie, because it helps out with this deck a bit more. It's actually quite rare in duels, especially getting towards the end when you've already got powerful cards on the field, that you'll play 6 power cards. Occasionally you will, if you haven't had a chance to bolster your field before that, but that's essentially the Thor lineup, the main lineup at least. We're going to head into the Spider-Verse one. So we've got the Spider Tracer, which is really good for summoning different Spider-Verse characters to power up your Silk, which we'll look at more in a second. So like I say, it summons a Black Symbiote, 2 power and guard, and that can trigger up to 3 times in battle. You've got Ghost Spider, which herself, when she dies, she gains a Black Symbiote as well. Silk, every time a Spider-Verse character dies, it gains 2 armor. Obviously Starburst, it gains more and more. You've got Sandman, which I really like because it gives 2 opponents a stun when he gets destroyed, which is really handy. You've got Venom Mysterio. Now we use Venom Mysterio over the other Mysterio because the other Mysterio can actually stun our own people if we're unfortunate, because it's a random character, and Venom Mysterio summons 2 more. You've got Doppelganger Miles, which summons a red symbiote with double its power and a critical hit as well. We've got 4 Miles Morales Spider-Mans. Again, really good if we can get him on the field as early as possible, gives other characters more power. They've got the 1 single symbiote Spider-Man. I'd hope to get more in my deck eventually, but for now we've just got the 1, but he is OP as anything. And then we've got Great Responsibility, which is a real endgame card in this deck. You won't actually get to see it in the duels today, but it's one of the endgame cards, and you've got the End of Spider-Man. And again, it's quite an endgame card, but not quite as good as Great Responsibility. But what we're going to do now, we're going to look at the other 3 character sets inside these decks. It's essentially the same for both Thor and Spider-Man. As you can see, it's just characters really which don't need or rely on other archetypes to work within your deck. So obviously with the neutral it wouldn't anyway, but when we move on to things like Iron Man for both decks, and obviously vice versa in terms of the Thor and the Spider-Man decks, you want these cards which don't really rely too much on the other members of its archetype, because you don't want pointless cards coming up which you can't use to upgrade your field. The main point of using these special archetype decks, especially with Silk and with Hogun and Thor, is that you want to be bolstering those characters as much as possible, and you don't want to be wasting precious store slots with cards that just don't make sense to your deck. So it's really important that you get the cards that make sense to your deck. But what I want to do, we're going to jump into a duel, and we're going to just quickly have a look at how the Thor deck works to begin with. So as I was saying before, the Thor deck really relies on the Hogun card, especially until late game when you can grab the Thor. Hogun is essentially a budget Thor, but if you can upgrade him fast enough, he can become somewhat better in my opinion. Not 100% better, obviously a full power Thor is amazing, but he can become somewhat better. So what we're going to do, we're going to play 1 Asgardian card we grabbed, and we also want to play a card which will benefit us next round. We get the free upgrade in the shop next round, so we know that we can get +2 health from that character, so we're going to keep her there. Especially early on with these decks, because it's all about bolstering the field that you already have, bolstering those big characters. It doesn't matter huge amounts if you lose these early battles. We're going to get a draw here, but in general, if you lose those early battles, don't panic, because it's not the end of the world. Life does go on with those characters, even if we get that first loss. What we're going to do here, we're going to grab this guy. This guy is awesome. When you play him, he gives the people in your shop +1 power. Again, he's one that just works in any deck. I think he's part of the compulsory card pool, which you have to have. But it really works well to give a bit of extra bolstering to your team. Obviously, we get the +2 health there because we upgraded the shop. And as of yet, we haven't really had anything to start upgrading with this archetype. It's been pretty poor pulls at the moment. That's okay. It looks like we're going to lose this battle, which isn't the end of the world. It's only early on. Like I said, those early hits aren't as detrimental, especially if you've got a bit of extra health from those characters that can do so. But we'd be hoping in the next kind of couple of draws to grab a Hogun, at the very least, if not another Asgardian card to help us out to give our current one a bit more power. But really, at this point of the duel, we really want to be getting our Hogun cards. We want to be getting those eventually those Thor cards once the shop's upgraded enough. Now this is where having Spider-Verse characters which are useful with each other really comes in handy. Silk in the Thor deck is the only character who's not an Asgardian who I have 4 of, so that we can Starburst her if necessary, because all you need for her to work is just a couple of Spider-Verse characters. So we've got that Ghost Spider there as well. That Ghost Spider dying and then summoning the symbiote dying will get her up to 4 shield and 7 attack, just for free basically for us, as well as obviously getting the Hogun there, which is going to really help out. And we're going to get rid of a card so we can get a gem and summon the Asgardian army. That Asgardian army will come in clutch if we get the right Asgardian to get the shield. It doesn't always happen, but it's well worth having those two kind of like working together archetypes. It's quite funny actually. We're going to look at the Silk deck in a second, but we've already got Silk out. But like I say, Silk is the only character in the Asgardian deck which I'll have more than once, so that we can eventually Starburst her. So even if our Asgardian side of the field is looking quite poor, we can still have some kind of bolstering character there, even if she only gets 2 shield buffs each time. Now, as I said before, you are going to take a lot of hits when you start getting used to these decks, because you're trying to figure out which cards to play in which order to give yourself the best chance of winning those battles, especially with the ladder mode. Obviously it's been introduced. It was a bit controversial at first, but when you don't know what cards your opponent has, you really want to be having a strong field to go out there with. And luckily we get to Starburst to level 2 with our Hogun there, and also our other Asgardian, so we'll stick him out on the field. He's quite a good card for just powering up generally. He gets quite a high power level once you start putting your Asgardians on the field properly. And we give Hogun another buff there, which is really important, because in game at the moment he will be gaining, I think it's 4 shield every time he gets hit. Eventually he'll be gaining 8 shield every time he gets hit. So we've got a good start to his shield count. It's obviously not the best that his shield could have been at this point in the game, but we roll with it anyway. We've got a good little lineup here. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but we've got 3 Asgardian characters out there. Obviously we've got that neutral character who just buffed Hogun's shield, but we've got 2 Spider-Verse characters in there who work really well together. And as you can see, Hogun's not quite where we want him to be. He's 2-star, which means that every time he gets hit, he'll get 4 shields, and that's really good, and that's probably why I prefer him to Hulk sometimes, because Hulk only gains what shield he has, whereas Hogun will gain each time he gets hit at all. So if he just gets hit with a lot of 1-bombs, he grows significantly without actually losing too much shield. And late game, if he keeps taking out the low damage characters, he just grows and grows and grows. But he's not quite where we want him to be at this point in the game. He's 2-star, full buff each time. Not quite good enough when you're facing quite a full field with high shield and high power. especially like that Iron Man, especially when you've got a very full field, even if a couple of them are quite low power. But if we have a look now, we can see that Hogun's 4-star. He's had a few more buffs since, with different characters coming in to give him those little buffs, and he's got 32 natural shield, and that's really where you want to take this deck if you want to play it really well. And now we get a bit of a look into the Silk Shield deck. As I've said before, I'm not an expert on placement on the battlefield, but where I've placed my characters in these duels with these decks that I've built, it's worked fairly well for me. I'm in Platinum 3, Platinum 2, and I'm still winning a fair amount of duels. So I feel like something's working with the deck and the placement. So you can either follow that, or if you know a better way to place your cards, you go for it. But this is really just to advise of how these decks work best together. So the previous deck was very reliant on Hogun, very reliant on the character cards from other decks which don't do anything which is too detrimental. So for example, we didn't have a load of Iron Man cards that needed each other, but instead we have lots of cards that can benefit us in a general sense. As we draw one of them now, actually, gives us a 1 buff to the cards in the shop. And you may be thinking, if I'm running a Spider-Verse deck, why aren't I putting out that Ghost Spider straight away? But for these early rounds, what we really want to do is just stock up the field a tiny bit, especially with high shield, purely because we don't quite know when that Silk's going to drop. Sometimes it drops early doors and we get it really early in the shop. Sometimes it takes a fair while. Obviously we get an Asgardian character there, really great if we're running the Thor deck, but for now it's not so good. But we also get the Ghost Spider, which allows us to equip the Spider Tracer in a second, which is really useful. I don't think it comes quite in handy in this duel that we're looking at right now, but having characters that we can equip that to until we get the final bits of Mysterio's suit, so we can have 4 of those instead, is really important, because it gives us those Spider-Verse fodder, which we need to power up Silk in a second. So you'll see a couple of battles here, and essentially with this deck what you're doing is you're putting off and defending yourself as much as you can until you can draw Silk and draw powerful Spider-Verse cards which spawn fodder for Silk to just eat up and build shield with. And realistically you want to be getting a Starburst Silk by about turn 5 or 6, otherwise you just probably won't win the duel. You want to at least Starburst to 2 by about turn 4, if not more. But we're going to see if we can draw her here, and we do. We get Silk and we get Ghost Spider, which means we can say goodbye to one of our general cards. But that's a really positive thing, because now we've got Silk, we've got the Ghost Spider, so we've got at least 2 fodder there, which means a basic Silk is already up 4 shield. You've also got the Spider Tracer on the neutral card there, so whenever that pops its effect we'll get another bit of fodder for the team. And also, in even better news, we get another Ghost Spider, which means we can Starburst her to level 2, meaning that when she spawns a symbiote it'll actually spawn with, I believe it's 4 health rather than 2 that it would usually do. So it's a really positive turn actually, and we'll be hoping that we can get Silk in later turns to Starburst that. But as you can see, even with just a very minute amount of Spider-Verse cards and a large amount of neutral cards in this duel, actually, we can already see that different. Look at that, we already had symbiote fodder spawning, gives Silk some shield. Ghost Spider's just gone, which means we spawn another fodder. Silk also gets a shield from Ghost Spider. She's up to 4. As soon as that symbiote goes in a second, you see, yep, there she is, going up to higher shield, higher capacities, which is so important. Now you see the Spider Tracer coming in handy, even though we pretty much won this round anyway. But you can start to see how OP this deck can be if you really use Silk to your advantage. I usually keep her on the far right. I find she stays alive best over there, especially with when you're wanting to take out your Spider-Verse fodder to give her more power. It's a really positive thing to do. And in general, just as you go along. I usually use quite a few refreshes of the shop if I don't quite get the cards that I want, because if you don't use your gems on your turn, I believe they say for the next turn, but you're really wanting to take your field up a level each turn. You don't want to be leaving it the same for 2 or 3 turns until the end game, really, because you just won't really get through the duels. You'll get wiped out straight away. And as you can see, we've got that silk there. However, we didn't have enough gems to actually summon her, but we can lock the shop, which is one of the best features in my opinion, because even though we've run out of gems there, we did our refreshes and it's paid off ready for next turn, where we can starburst silk to level 2. Like I said earlier, it's really important to get silk as high as possible, because when she's that kind of level, she starts adding on 8 shield each time someone dies. And if you have a full field of Spider-Verse characters which spawn fodder, by the time you get to your silk, she is on an immense amount of power, and she's pretty unstoppable. And she just wipes out fields, really. It's just a really, really useful card. See that, she jumps straight to that sit shield. Such a powerful card, such an OP card. Now at this point I didn't really know why that extra drat spawned. I didn't know there was a card that had that effect. So we lost that round, but that wasn't the end all and be all of it, or rather the be all and end all. But now we can actually get that second silk, we can starburst her, really crucial to advancing in this duel. And it's a shame because in both times we haven't really drawn too many of the archetype we're looking to example. However, you can see even from the small amount of cards from each archetype we're pulling, how powerful these dependent decks can be, especially when you know exactly how to upgrade them, how to buff them so they can be the best they can be. Obviously we get that Ghost Spider quite late on, and as soon as we can grab her when we've got enough gems, we can actually starburst her to level 4, which would be really, really useful. But for now we just have to lock her in. Again, a massive benefit of having the lock option on the shop, meaning that we can just keep her there until we've got enough gems and hope our field's good enough this turn. With Silk being Starburst 2, we can be assured that she's going to gain quite a bit of shield as the game progresses. Even that Hogun's coming in handy. He's level 1, but he's still grabbing those little bits of shield that we need him to grab, little bits of power rather. And Silk's just gaining that shield when she needs it, when the Spider-Verse characters die. And it just makes such an OP deck that I've won so many duels, so many times I've gone on winning streaks of 4 or 5, just because I've been able to get Silk to the highest power possible. And it does come with a bit of trial and error. You start to learn which cards to use first, which cards not to use straight away. But eventually you do get used to it, and you do start to understand the best ways to play your cards to maximise the buffs on those high power cards like Hogun or Silk. And obviously now we can grab those Starburst versions of Absorbing Man and Ghost Spider. Not only do we get really powerful versions of those cards, I love Absorbing Man, the way he just deals out 4 damage 4 times when he Starburst. But it's also good because we get these Starburst cards to summon extra heroes. I rarely get anything good in those, so I wouldn't ever really properly rely on them. But, you know, they're good for what they do. And we get another Starburst here, we get another Starburst Sandman. I mean, bit by bit, our field is becoming more Spider-Verse designed. And there you see we get the final version of Silk that we need to get her to Starburst level 4, which is a really positive thing. But we will have to wait till the next turn to do that, because we haven't quite got enough gems without risking leaving our field quite wide open. But obviously that's quite a bare field in terms of the Silk deck that we're wanting. But if we have a look at the field now, you can see that we've got those Spider-Verse characters quite powered up, especially that Venom Mysterio spawning those 2 Spider-Verse fighters that we need to power Silk up. And you can see just how powerful she gets and how tanky she can be on her own. This was a real massive kind of play, because we saw Silk get left alone, regardless of how much shield she had. She was against 5 characters who were still fairly powered up. Obviously, they looked fairly weak, but they still had a fair bit of power. But she was alone against 5 different characters. But because of the buffs that we put on her, because of the attachments we put on her, her shield was so high and her damage was so buffed that there was just no way she was losing this this battle. And in actual fact, we didn't lose this duel either because of that silk. So that was a really, really big positive thing. And again, we're going to just skip forward to that final battle, and you'll see that we've got a fully decked out Spider-Verse field, loads of fodder being available from the Venom Mysterio, from the Black Symbiote, from Ghost Spider, and Sandman just helps out with that kind of tanky defense as well. And he also triggers the last words with that Spider-Man mask, which is really awesome. But we're facing a really strong Iron Man field, which kind of shows how superior the Silk archetype is. I call it the Silk archetype because it's definitely not the Spider-Man archetype right now, because the Spider-Man card's accessible to the general person playing who hasn't opened loads and loads of packs. It's so rare that you can get those high-powered Spider-Man cards. And not only that, when you're in a high-powered duel, quite often, by the time you get to those kind of Spider-Man cards like Miles Morales, even Black Symbiote at times, you've most likely got a field which is already strong enough to kind of justify not using those cards, even though you will anyway, to really bulk up the characters like Silk. But it definitely is a Silk deck rather than a Spider-Man deck, because she is just absolutely OP. Is here, she's against 3 super high power cards, but she still pulls it out of the bag and smashes it, and she actually gets us the victory, which shows quite simply how OP that Silk is, and how OP the deck is. Now, which is better, that's up to you to decide, but those are the main 2 archetypes that I use in Platinum. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed, please leave a like or a comment, and subscribe to us to join us on our journey into Marvel Duel. See you later.